When the Prime Minister speaks about the most important relationship is with Indigenous people, and yet he's not quick enough to respond to emergency situations.
Tonight, the debate rages on in the House of Commons over the government response to the housing crisis.
Having a distinct language qualifies Indigenous peoples for the right to self-determination.
The United Nations declares 2019 the year of Indigenous languages.
I know I could make something really genuine and unique as long as I know how to use the tools.
And we'll tell you about the Fab Lab. That's bringing 21st century equipment to Indigenous youth. Good evening, welcome to APTN National News. I'm Dennis Ward.
And I'm Melissa Ridgen. A new report out of the University of Guelph says a woman is killed every other day in Canada, and that figure is even higher when the victim is an Indigenous female.
At least 57 females were killed in 2018, ranging in age from 2 to 94 by males, and said the report entitled #CallItFemicide. That works out to a woman or girl killed in this country every 2.5 days. Indigenous women represent only about 5% of the population, but made up 36% of the women and girls killed by violence. 34% of the victims were killed in rural areas where only 16% of the population lives. More than 90% of the accused killers are men.
What we find is that in a large number of intimate partner homicides, the person who's doing the killing is also committing suicide. So there is no justice for the family at that point. And those who do not attempt or commit suicide seem to have lighter sentences.
The lead researcher says calling it femicide makes it clear that there's a difference between a random act of violence and being killed by an intimate partner. Tensions are still high over the proposed Coastal GasLink pipeline in British Columbia. The line was at the center of a bridge blockade and RCMP action at the Unistoten camp earlier this year. A deal was struck between the company and the Unistoten camp that allowed exploration but not construction. The Wet'suwet'en hereditary chiefs say the company has now bulldozed trap lines and destroyed an area called Camp 9A, violating the Wildlife Act and their agreement with the company. They want the provincial government to approve a cease and desist order immediately. We'll have more on this story as it develops.
UNESCO, the United Nations body concerned with education, science, and culture, declared 2019 as the International Year of Indigenous Languages. Several Indigenous representatives from all over the world attended the launch in Paris this week, including an 8-year-old Anishinaabe boy, Adeshki Kun Faski from Kitigan-Zibi First Nation, who sang and spoke Anishinaabe. The year intends to bring attention to the plight of Indigenous languages, find solutions, and then take action. Chief Wilton Littlechild spoke at the launch and said preserving language is also about sovereignty.
Having a distinct language qualifies Indigenous peoples for the right to self-determination. So importantly, our treaty and inherent rights are carried in our languages, in our ceremonies, in our songs.
Today, the Assembly of First Nations of Quebec and Labrador held an election, and the man elected chief is a familiar face to many. Tom Fenario has more.
Monsieur Gilbert Dominique a reçu 9 votes. Monsieur Ghislain Picard a reçu 30 votes.
Regional Chief Ghislain Picard is the longest-serving member of the Assembly of First Nations Executive Committee. He has been representing First Nations in Quebec and Labrador since 1992. He says the key to his political longevity is constant evolution.
It's a capacity to be reinventing yourself so that you stay the course, but you operate differently.
This is the start of Picard's 10th consecutive mandate. Grand Chief Serge Simon says he voted for Picard. He says Picard's record speaks for itself.
His experience, I think, is his will to listen to people. I think that really strikes a positive chord in people, whether you're chief or not. And he's also a very good diplomat when it comes to bringing our message to the governments.
Gilbert Dominique is a former chief for Mashtoyats First Nation. Gracious in defeat, during his campaign, Dominique was nonetheless critical of the AFNQL's dealings with Quebec.
Nos relations là, avec le Québec, moi je pense c'est à reconstruire, ok. Et avec le Québec, inévitablement, il y a des enjeux au quotidien qui se dressent là au sein de l'ensemble des Premières Nations. Je pense là seulement à la question du territoire. On a beau penser, bien entendu, là, aspirer à assumer pleinement notre autonomie.
Picard says that the AFNQL did a good job bringing First Nation issues to the forefront of the 2018 Quebec election. He met with Quebec Premier François Legault on October 26th and is cautiously optimistic that it will be a better relationship than with the previous government.
How do we take advantage of that situation and feed it? Because we know that governments quickly forget. So to me, that's why we have to stay that course and make sure that this government, you know, will have an open ear.
The 68-year-old Innu from Pessamit First Nation will have at least another 4 years to lobby for First Nations in Quebec. Although, if most of the chiefs here have their way, it might last even longer.
I think Ghislain, it's going to come down to him eventually. He's going to have to decide whether he moves on, because the chiefs, I don't think, are ready to let him go.
Tom Fenario, APTN National News, Montreal.
During his victory speech, Regional Chief Picard expressed trepidation about Canada's upcoming child welfare legislation. Here's what he said.
In a matter of maybe even Friday, I expect that the federal government will be tabling a bill on the issue of child welfare. And there's been talk about this for months, if not years. This is part of the election promise from the current Liberal government in Ottawa. And I'm also hearing that we're far from being satisfied with the process. And to me, this is the role that we have as AFNQL, to have our eyes open, our ears wide open, to monitor what's going on around us. Because every decision that is made by every action taken by this government has impacts not only on our communities, on yourself as chiefs, but on our families as well.
The NDP continued to question the federal government today over the housing crisis in Cat Lake First Nation. At a press conference in Ottawa, Charlie Angus said mold contamination is so severe, 75% of the homes there need to be demolished. He wants the federal government to do something right away.
We need an immediate plan, a task force to actually start to gather the data on how serious this issue is. And we're calling on the Prime Minister and Minister Philpott, who's at Treasury Board, who should understand this file because she's certainly overseen it, to put in place in the next federal budget the monies that are necessary to get a credible housing plan for Indigenous communities across Canada and particularly across the North.
These are people. When the Prime Minister speaks about the most important relationship is with Indigenous people, and yet he's not quick enough to respond to emergency situations, that is very sad. To me, he's just uttering words, and he doesn't mean it. If he means it, he will act on these things.
The child welfare system was again in focus today for part 2 of our 3-part series. Highlights from that show's coming up.
But first, here's a look at Thursday's weather forecast. Starting on the east coast, -6 and snow for Halifax, +3 and rain in St. John's, -3 and snow for Nain and Kuujjuaq, -14 in Montreal and Sept-Îles, -25 in Chibougamau, -17 for North Bay, 19 below for Windsor and London, 23 below for Kapuskasing, Timmins and Thunder Bay. In northern Manitoba, -35 for Churchill, -28 in Puckatawagan and Thompson, -23 in Winnipeg, Gimli, Princess Harbor, and Barons River. +1 under the sun for Swift Current, -7 in Regina, -12 for Meadow Lake, -17 in Buffalo Narrows. Welcome back. Quebec is currently asking people who live in the province to register their long guns, and First Nations are not pleased with how they're going about it. For more, we spoke with Chief Lance Heyman of Kewowak First Nation. Chief Heyman, appreciate you taking some time for us. Why are First Nations in Quebec upset with the long gun registry?
Well, first and foremost, it's probably because of the fact that there is the Quebec government is going to unilaterally implement legislation that directly impacts our community's constitutionally protected rights to hunt, and they've done so without any consultation. And I guess the bigger issue for us is that they've placed the consultation and consider us to be just another Quebecer, but as First Nations, we have Aboriginal rights, and for all nations in Quebec, we claim our rights and title to the territory in spite of what Quebec says. So just frustrated with the fact that they've gone ahead and tabled legislation, didn't allow consultation, did not take into consideration points raised by the Assembly of First Nations when, in March 2016, when they appeared before the Parliamentary Committee. And then we find out yesterday that because of pressure by Québécois, the provincial government is ready to proceed with emergency amendments to this legislation, whereas we have been asking for an opportunity to meet directly and have that discussion and talk about our rights and consultation and appropriate accommodation, and that's not done. So it's very frustrating that Quebecers can force the government to make a significant change by a little bit of pressure, and as First Nations whose rights are going to be directly impacted by this legislation, we are not given that same opportunity.
Chief, do you or your community members plan to register your long guns before the deadline on January 29th?
Probably not. I won't personally. I know some members will for sure, basically out of fear and repercussions that will occur by the provincial authorities after the 29th. The minute we step outside of our federal jurisdiction, our reserves, Quebec will insist that those rules need to be followed. So my members are going to be directly impacted, and Quebec is in the process of criminalizing my members' right to hunt by enforcing this legislation and enforcing our members to register. Right. We've already been through this. All of my members have taken, gun safety courses, have firearms acquisition certificates, and therefore have already registered the majority of these firearms through the federal process. And again, we just feel it's another, step by Quebec without taking into consideration our special relationship with the territory and the exercising of our rights, and they're going to apply a legislation carte blanche, just like we are Quebecers without taking into consideration we are First Nations with our own rights, ability to develop our own registry under our own jurisdiction if we so choose, but the province has not allowed us to have that opportunity to discuss that.
Chief, we'll have to leave it there, but appreciate you taking some time for us.
Not a problem. Thank you.
Today on InFocus, part 2 of our 3-part series on the CFS industry that has 14,000 Indigenous kids under age 14 in its care across this country. Today we got some insight from parents who found themselves targets and how they beat or continue to fight that system. Let's take a look.
I've been involved with them since I was young because I was a young parent, and there was never ever anything like that prior to. There was always the same kind of things that were said, and they've never taken my kids. So when they took them, all this time, drilling me about their personal baby stories and putting this in and making a file for all of them.
They wanted to know about each individual
child. From birth on.
And so you asked them, why are you interested in...
Yes, I did. I asked them, why are they asking all these personal questions when those are my memories and my baby's memories to keep, not for anybody else to share. They said, oh, just in case they get adopted out. I'm like, why are you adopting my kids?
And they'd had your babies for just a couple of weeks by this point, and they're already looking at adopting them out.
There's a lot of work that needs to be done in fixing it. It's from all the stories I heard, it seems like it's a broken system. There's so much that can be, well, I don't really want to comment what needs to be done. I know a lot of, Tim Curl was telling me what he heard was how people are treated in the system. One example would be, there was a 22-month-old boy named Vander Daniels who passed away. He was scalded to death in the bathtub and he drowned. And what Tim Curl told us was when the CFS went to inform his mother of the boy's death, of course she would be hysterical. Like, I can't even imagine what it would be like being a parent and getting told your kid passed away. And I guess she broke down, fell on the ground crying, and they told her to get up or they're going to have to call the police. So this is how people are being treated in the system.
You can watch the entire episode on our Facebook page or by visiting our website, aptnnews.ca.
Time for a quick break, but you'll want to stick around. When we come back, we're visiting one of Canada's most haunted places. Before that, here's the rest of Thursday's weather forecast. Picking back up in northern Alberta, -6 in Grande Prairie, -17 for Fort McMurray, +5 in Medicine Hat, sunny skies and 8 above for Lethbridge. +8 in Victoria, +9 with showers for Tofino. -17 in Fort Nelson, +1 for Smithers and Prince George. In the Yukon, -27 for Dawson and Old Crow, -13 in Whitehorse. In the NWT, -18 in Fort Simpson and Wrigley. 22 below with snow for Yellowknife. Welcome back. Fab Lab is a place where creativity meets digital technology. If you can dream it up, it can be created. It's the brainchild of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and there are over 1,200 of them worldwide, 24 in Canada. APTN's Todd Lamoran gets some help to show us around the only Indigenous one, the Onak Fab Lab.
Here's some chess pieces.
Garrett White Duck Mongo gives us a tour.
We're making figurines for our board game, which is right here, actually.
He proudly shows off the Onak Fab Lab's teamwork.
And the name of our game is called Now You ZB, Now You Don't.
Right now it's just a prototype, but it was created with digital tools.
Turned it into a file that the laser engraver could read so that it could cut exactly what we drew. I surprised myself and about what we could do. And everyone, too, here, I think they feel the same exact way.
The youth work on individual projects in addition to a team project. Laura Mullen admits to being skeptical at first.
I had no idea that, we could have this much power over what we're doing. Everything you can possibly imagine is doable.
Celine O'Clair's concern about Indigenous high school dropout rates led her to create the Fab Lab.
Which is bringing the first, the 21st century equipment to the youth. I thought that because of the approach, the way the Fab Lab function, that could be something that could work very well with Indigenous youth.
I know I could make something really genuine and unique as long as I know how to use the tools, which they're showing me here.
And showing how to use the tools is Pon Thong Susanomin, the Fab Lab's instructor. She says the most important thing is gaining confidence to learn anything is possible.
That type of learning is very gratifying for them, and in return it's very gratifying for me to see that evolution in a very short time.
I'm learning so much more about myself because I was in general arts before in university, and I really wasn't happy with that. I wasn't sure where I was going, and now I have a good idea of what I'm going to do next.
And being an Indigenous Fab Lab creates a comfort zone for everyone involved.
I come here in the morning and I feel like I finally got a place for myself, and I can express myself and be myself more.
This group of Fab Labbers will finish in March. There's also plans for a mobile Fab Lab to go to remote Indigenous communities. Paul Lamran, APTN National News, Gatineau, Quebec.
If you Google Rankin Inlet, Nunavut, you might be surprised by some of the findings. The hamlet is listed as one of Canada's most haunted places. Our reporter Charlotte Moore-Jacobs goes ghost busting to find out why the Rankin Fire Hall gives some of the crew the chills.
The firefighters in Rankin Inlet, Nunavut bravely enter buildings on fire to save lives. But where they hang up their hats is another story.
You know, during the day when I saw the ghost and we were just getting the place ready for a practice night.
Mark Cappy is one of many, past and present, on the team who say they have seen ghosts.
They're just on the steps over here, the older man and the little girl.
What was going through your mind when you saw that?
No, I just couldn't believe it, and we started wondering why they were showing their presence to me.
And he is very sure it was a ghost.
Because when I first saw it, I blinked my eyes and looked again, opened the door, it wasn't there anymore.
Ghosty has their typical hangout. They are always seen in this area. As for who these spirits are, Fire Chief Mark Wyatt says there are a few theories.
The only thing I can think of is there was a fire chief that killed himself quite a few years ago, but he didn't kill himself in the fire hall. The little girl could have been a victim of something, and maybe we took her in an ambulance and she passed away years ago or something like that. I don't know.
Cappy says he often hears footsteps at night when he's alone in the hall.
It was like about a month after I started 5 years ago. There was footage of things on this chalkboard that just fell off. We caught it on that camera right there, and I don't know what happened to the footage.
The team has thought about using infrared technology to locate the ghosts. But if the paranormal activity lacked body heat, it could be tricky.
Yeah, I expect to see it again. I just don't know when. And try not to run out next time.
While the team isn't crying boo-hoo just yet, the likelihood of crossing paths with a ghost makes for just another day in the office. Charlotte Moore-Jacobs, APTN National News, Rankin Inlet.
Always a good time to bust out that music. You and I should go ghost busting.
I was thinking this would be perfect for APTN Investigates, right?
I heard there's ghosts in the basement here.
I've heard there's ghosts up there.
Time for a new show. Unfortunately, that'll be a different show. That's all we have for today on APTN National News.
If you're wanting to catch the entire episode of today's InFocus, where we continued our discussion on the child welfare system, you can tune in tomorrow at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. I'm Melissa Ridgen. Have a great night.
And I'm Dennis Ward. Have a great night. We'll see you back here tomorrow.